Hello, everyone. Welcome to MD Media's weekly show, this panel. We have been off air for the past 2 weeks. But today, we are happy to be back with the whole panel, and I have uh, Iskel Kapisa, Faisal Robla, and Duke Burbridge back on Ethiopia, state of war and peace affairs. That's the topic for today. And we will start with the first segment of the show, what stood out for each of the panelists. Today we'll start with Isgal. Isgal, what stood out for you over the past maybe 14, 15 days?
Well, what stood out for me is the news of the collapse of the Ethiopian economy this week. The war has clearly taken its toll. Let me put this in historical perspective. In 1991, when the Derg government fell, unable to win the same war that the Abiy prosperity government or prosperity regime has also proven unable to win thus far. The Derg government had incurred about $10 billion, mainly to the Soviet Union at the time. In today's dollars, that would amount to $22 billion. In fighting exactly the same war that ended the Derg government under the leadership of or the stewardship of Abiy Ahmed and the Prosperity Party, Ethiopia's national debt has increased to a point that it is going to be unsustainable. When Abiy took power in 2018, the national debt was $25 billion. The next year, it was $28 billion. In 2020, it has jumped to $35 billion. In 2021, just last year, it increased to $44 billion US dollars. This year, the initial reports are that Ethiopia's national debt has exceeded $45 billion, or close to $55 billion. This means the national debt is now the fastest growing part of the Ethiopian economy. In 4 years, Abiy's government has borrowed $29 billion. That's what it amounts to. If it was $25 billion when he took over, and today it's about $55 billion, his government, or under his leadership, Ethiopia had borrowed about $29 to $30 billion. The Derg government hadn't borrowed that much in 17 years that it was in power. The EPRDF government hadn't borrowed that much in 27 years. And the sad part of it, Abiy's government has nothing to show for it. For the amount of money that they have borrowed, there is really nothing to show for it. Not 1 inch of railway was built. The highways that are under construction or being still completed, such as the Mojo Hawassa Highway, was a project that was launched under the EPRDF. Now, to be fair, Addis Ababa looks different today. It has more parks, museums, libraries, and repainted buildings. But now the chickens have come home to roost. There is no dollar left in the national bank. That's why the National Bank governor and the Minister of Finance are in Washington. Because there is no certainty that they would be going back home with some dollars that they could use to sustain the export part of the economy, or the country's international trade. The finance minister, while the minister himself is here, the ministry has now announced that they will take measures to kind of declare a moratorium on importing certain amount of goods. But if you look closely to it, and they say only 38 items, but the items, actually, the goods that are banned from being imported range from chewing gums to fully assembled automobiles. So there will be no gum, no chewing gum, no chocolates for the children of the prosperity era. There will be no perfume, no lotion, no wig for the women of the prosperity period. There will be no Italian jackets or Turkish wool for the men of the prosperous Ethiopia. There will be no Toyota vehicles. There will be for the nouveau rich that had actually become billionaires overnight under the prosperity party. And all of this is going to impact all those whose livelihood is dependent on import export related businesses. And it's going to have a ripple effect throughout the economy. All of this is happening today. But last week in Jijiga, Abiy Ahmed, addressing the Executive Council of the Prosperity Party, told them that Ethiopia is on course to become one of the superpowers in the world today. He said that last week, and today his government has basically said we will shut down the import sector of the economy. They will have nothing left in the bank for medicine. There will be nothing left for others in foreign exchange. The economy has come to a screeching halt, and I don't think they will be even better to be in the position to finance the war, much less to become one of the prosperous, the center of power and prosperity in the world in the coming 30 years. That is really what stood out to me.
Thank you, Uzgel. And I think on the main topic, we'll be talking about under that circumstance, even the war in all directions is raging, and that also it's economy even more. Faisal, what stood out for you over the past week?
I think there are so many issues one can talk about Ethiopia. And as Eskiel said, the eye-catching and attention is the war economy of Ethiopia. That Ethiopia is conducting the largest war as we speak, bigger than any war. Even rich countries, even Russia's war becomes a miniature when you compare to that of Ethiopia. And it's a multi-front war. It's not only in Tigray, although that's the most devastating war. It is touching a lot of regions, including Oromia. And basically, the subject matter that Scale touched is so tickling to me as an urban and regional planner. Finally, the war economy is negatively impacting the middle class and the upper middle class. Will now either say that only how Ethiopians are not starving, like the princess in Ethiopia in the 1980s, 70s during Haile Selassie said, when she was told that millions of Ethiopians are dying in Wollo. She said, we are only 5,000, how can millions die? Today, what you see in Addis Ababa, until now, was that only the rural people are dying. Now it is finally becoming to roost at home, and the middle class and the upper middle class, when they lose their chocolate and wine and cheese and what have you, that average people don't see, probably will see finally and get away from this ethnic drunkenness that they have in Addis Ababa and probably confront and fight for their bread. Why I'm mentioning and piggybacking with Scale is that whereas the government was talking about chocolate and fancy candies as a solution to its problem, Facebook in Jigjiga was filled with people talking about how much onion costs and how much the potato cost and how that. So you have these two different worlds there, what economies producing. The war expanding. Today we learned that the Somali Prime Minister, who is now in Addis Ababa, will be traveling to Jigjiga. And he travels to Jigjiga also at a time when the war that we talked about is expanding also to southwest Ethiopia, including Somali and Oromo region. As we speak, 30,000 people between yesterday and today have been dislocated from the Liban zone because Shimalis Abdisa's Leopolis are now playing what Abdi Ilay's Leopolis played in the last round of this country's history, that he's really, ambushing and killing poor Somalis for whatever reason. And the death rate is very high. It has not been reported how high, but it's very significant. And within 2 days, 30,000 people got displaced. And the Prime Minister of Somalia, historically never been in such a situation, would be going to Jigjiga for three reasons. Number one, some people are accusing him of having a family agenda to resolve a conflict between Mustafa Akbar and some of the other sub-clans who are now getting prominent role in Somalia. That's what Somalis are talking behind the scene. I cannot confirm that. But I can confirm two things. One, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, president of Somalia, has reached some kind of agreement with Prime Minister Abiy to collaborate and coordinate their efforts against Al-Shabaab. So the alibi for the PM to go down there would be to see how the war on the Somali-Ethiopian side is going vis-a-vis Al-Shabaab. And the other thing is probably to bring a peace between several sections of the groups in that area, particularly along clan lines. How far that will work, we don't know, but that is what people are saying. Having said that, I think there's a glimmer of hope in Puntland, another state in Somalia, where that government or regional state for the first time came up with a plan and vision to carry district elections. This would be the first time a proper district inside Somalia would carry local elections to really take the journey for democratization. Whether you can democratize any country in the Horn of Africa, as long as Ethiopia is in a war situation and war raging, is a question that I cannot answer at this point in time. However, that is a glimmer of hope. And I think that I will stop there, but come back later on to some of the issues.
Thank you, Faisal, for that. And maybe, Duke, I will give you the chance in terms of the highlights of the week for you. But I want to announce to our viewers as well, Duke Burbridge is starting a new show on Sunday, and it's called Tigray Humanitarian Update. I just want to play the intro for that, and Duke would be speaking to that as well. Great. I can't wait to watch your first show on Sunday. Duke, you can speak to that as well, and what stood out for you over the past 7 days?
Thank you, and thanks for putting that together. That's really cool. What stood out for me in the past week was the most recent update from the food distribution. What we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks about the food distribution slowing, of course, because there's no food getting into Tigray, there's no fuel getting into Tigray. This has really started to impact what was a very robust response for the first time in 2 years. They were able to distribute close to enough food to satisfy the demand of people who desperately need it. But this was, of course, was only able to last a couple of weeks because now they're out of fuel. And the last distribution numbers, about 400,000 people received food, but out of those 400,000 people, only about 100,000 of them got a full 6-month ration of food. The rest of them got a smaller ration. Some of them just wheat and oil. Others of them just got a sack of wheat, as has been going on for the past couple of weeks. The real problem, though, is that there's only about 11,000 liters of fuel left in the capital. Now, what this means is that, as they note, 740,000 people will not receive food during this distribution round if they don't get more fuel. Now that means that next week, chances are, unless they really break up the rations into very small portions, that means that only about 200,000 people are going to be able to get food next week, because they're only about 1 million people away from finishing the round. At that point, the response stops. At that point, there is no more humanitarian response in Tigray. And so the moment is now for the diplomats. The moment was a long time ago, but now the diplomats have to pressure the Ethiopian government to open up the supply lines for humanitarian aid. There's no reason that these should still be blocked. They have a few flights that have been coming in to switch out staff, but they need to bring humanitarian aid, they need to bring fuel, they need to bring medicine. Everything is falling apart as far as the humanitarian situation is concerned, and nobody seems to be addressing this, particularly from the US side or from the UN side. They still pretend that they need a peace treaty to get food to civilians, which is redesigning the rules of warfare if that's going to be the position that they maintain. I'll go into more of that on my show on Sunday, but that's what jumped out at me.
Great, thank you, Doc. So let's go to the topic we selected for today. So today we want to talk about, given that we were not on air for the past 2 weeks, state of affairs in terms of war and peace in Ethiopia. Scale, let's start. We know that the 50 days mark has just passed 2 days ago since the recent round of war started on August the 24th. And I don't know if there was a day where there was no war, I mean, in terms of intensity and so on. And we know as well it's from all directions and well coordinated by Eritrea and with Ethiopia and so on. And we also know there was the African Union-led peace process. And where are we now in terms of these peace-war affairs vis-a-vis what just was released from the State Department, U.S. Department of State, saying intensify military operation in northern Ethiopia. This statement just came, I think, an hour ago or so. Pascal?
As far as war is concerned, the war in the north, I guess when we say war, we probably need to use the appropriate term that actually describes what is going on in the whole country. Indeed, in the north, in Tigray, war has resumed. That we know. It's now the 52nd day since the war resumed on August 24th. But it's a civil war in Ethiopia, and that's what needs to be emphasized. There is a civil war in Ethiopia, and the northern part is just one side of it. It's the largest one. It's the one that gets attention, but there is a civil war in the country. Definitely, since the war started about 52 days ago, Tigray had been attacked on several fronts. I think the Ethiopian government had mobilized all of the divisions that are in the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. Isaias has also mobilized about 30 divisions of the Eritrean Defense Forces. And the Amhara region, I don't know what the number is from the Amhara region. Also, there are the special forces of the Amhara region that participated in launching this round of attack against the Tigray. From the northwest, it actually started in the south, as you know, with the operations in Kobo. That was repulsed by the Tigrayan Defense Forces. The Tigrayan Defense Forces not only repulsed it, but they also occupied the city for some time and went even as far as Waldia, but then retreated back to the Tigray borders. They went there for a reason. They got what they wanted, they completed their mission, and they withdrew back into Tigray from the southern region. In the east, from the east through the Barahele, instead of going through the the kind of known route that goes through Abala to Mekelle, the Eritrean forces that were stationed in the Eritrean part of Assab, about 23 kilometers from Assab and 93 kilometers south of Massawa, 5 divisions of the Eritrean Defense Forces attacked through Barahele to cut it through to Wikro and then attack Mekelle from the northeast. That was also proved futile. The Tigrayan Defense Forces not only repulsed their incursions, but they also obliterated about the 5 divisions of Eritrea EDF that came from that area. From the southwest side, from the Abergele, from the Maitsamri within the Tigray area through to the Debit, there was a huge force that went in there, about 90,000 in total, 90,000 that made incursions into the Tigray region. The last time that we know is that it was a brutal war. Even brutality does not recognize the way these battles are fought. But about 90,000 Ethiopian, Eritrean, Amhara region forces were either captured or killed or retreated. But in general, that area also was foiled. The attack on that area was also foiled. In the northwest, until this week, the combined forces of the EDF and the ENDF had tried to attack with about 100,000 persons under arms, with about 5 divisions, mechanized divisions from the Ethiopian side. Look, this time what the Isaias did was, in that respect, is that Ethiopia transported about 30 divisions of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces to Eritrea, put them under the command of Eritrean generals, and they were attacking on all fronts. From the east on Adigrat side to Zalambesa to Rama, and the most important one was to get to Shire. The last I've heard about it is that it was a brutal war. A lot of people have been killed, maybe on both sides. They shell from a distance the area suspected to be the hideout of the Tigrayan Defense Forces. They keep doing that. But the Tigrayans have, I think, built fortresses in that area, and once they are done with the shelling, they come out and mow them down. So they were able to push them back. So after 52 days of fighting, mobilizing about 750,000 forces on the ENDF, EDF, Amhara side, the Tigrayan Defense Forces have been able to withstand, and in some areas roll back the onslaught, the onslaught that was unleashed against them. But what I wanted to and I will only say about the war, we'll talk about the peace some other time later. In the center and in the west and in the south, the Oromo Liberation Army has been active. There wasn't a day that passed without fighting in the Horo Gudru region of the 4 regions of the Walaga, previously known as Walaga, basically in the west. There isn't a day that there was no fighting. And there was fighting, and the OLA fighters had been able to take over the administrations of the Olankomi, that is about 50 kilometers west of Addis Ababa, at Aberga, in all of that area is probably west and northwest of Ambo, about 100 kilometers. And then in the northern Shawa region, on the way to the Amhara region, there was also closure of the road and a lot of fighting in that area as well. The same in the south. So the idea that under the guise that there is only war in the north, there is war in the not outskirts, but a few kilometers away from Addis Ababa, launched by the OLA So there is really a civil war, and in other places also there might be some, but there is no time to talk about all of them. But that's the general picture of the war as it stands right now.
Great. Thank you, Scale. Faisal?
Yeah, I think Scale described the war and the intensity, and finally, the world, particularly the international community, is coming out of its hiding points to recognize the intensifying military operation, as you said. This this press release from the State Department, as you said, just came out 1 hour ago, and basically it's mentioning several issues pertaining to the war. Number one, it's mentioning that fact that this war's intensity is huge and it has been intensified in the last 50 days, and the press really sees that the consequence of this war is huge. They blame and they call the Ethiopian National Defense Forces and Eritrean Defense Forces to immediately halt their joint military offensive and for Eritrea to withdraw its forces from northern Ethiopia, period. That's really a very explicit language sent both to Abiy and to Isaias. The only challenge is that Abiy is married at this point to Abiy, and as many elites of Addis Ababa who advocate for Abiy admit in public forums, that Ethiopia, in their eyes today, doesn't have any defense outside Isaias. So Abiy is a conundrum. On the one hand, he is listening or hearing the outcry coming from the international community, whose help he needs now more than any time. But at the same time, he is in no position whatsoever to anger or defy his boss at this point in time. And people may take this as a rhetorical issue, but it is not. Abiy is really in between a hard place and a rock. He would have liked, in many opinions, as I hear, to do something different, but he doesn't want to give in to TDF, TPLF, but at the same time, he cannot go independent and free out of the chokehold that Isaias is holding him. So he's in a bad position. They also warn that TPLF should also be careful of its provocations in the war in some parts of Ethiopia. But they also emphasize that the need for talks and resuming of talks led by the AU is needed. This comes at a very strategic time when we are also learning that Mike Hammer has started to re-engage the Ethiopian side so far. The expectation is that he will also engage TDF, TPLF, but so far he is in Addis, and he I think assured his listeners and his clients, like all of us, that the peace process will restart. Now, I think this war is going to go into the history books as one of the brutal wars, but I think there would be a lot of lessons to be learned. We don't know when it will end, but we do know that the will of the people, no matter who they are, Tigray may symbolize this, but the will of the people, if they decide to fight for their existence, is difficult to break. I mean, this history comes from the Greek days of Spartacus in Athens, and we have seen many situations, and that's playing right now in the theater, as we see hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Eritrean mechanized are now literally locked in less than 20 kilometers from their border. The only option that they have is to shell civilian centers, which is what this declaration from the State Department is talking. They specifically mentioning the same way that TDF, TPLF mentions that Shira is being bombarded by air and by mechanized. And this is the first time I recall the international world really telling the Ethiopian and Eritrean side that they are shelling civilian centers. So you can tell that the world community is inching toward this sanctioning Ethiopia, which they have already done Eritrea. I think I agree with this with Scale that the war is not only in the north, although that's the most devastating and most probably memorable war in many years. But as I argued today in another venue, actually people have been fed false narrative that the war of Tigray and Ethiopian federal government started in November last year, which is totally false. The war started in 2019 in Oromia with Apache helicopters and massive Ethiopian forces bombarding Wellege. So it may have intensified and took the biggest shape in Tigray, but the war did not start because of what have been claimed to have happened in Tigray in November 2020. Now, add to that the fact that both Oromia and Tigray symbolize the larger scale of the war, but there are interregional wars that are increasing their intensity by the day. The Afar-Somali war has now gotten out of hand to a point where a Djibouti group, the fraud, who are by ethnicity Afar, based largely in Eritrea, but also partly in Ethiopia, have for the first time attacked Djibouti. And Djibouti, for the first time, even felt that it has to defy the behemoth of Ethiopia and fight for survival, and showed signs of, decrying about Ethiopia. Today, I saw a tweet by one of the most influential ministers of Djibouti, sitting with the finance minister of Somalia, and saying borders don't divide us. Djibouti used to be careful about these languages in the past, as we know. Today, they said that Djiboutian ministers are saying Somalia is our brothers and borders don't mean anything to us. It's an indication of Djibouti sending a message of frustration. So there is the Somali-Afar war in the regional. There is the new war that Shimelis and team would like to initiate between Oromo and Somali to take the attention away from the increasing Ola mission. It's not really one that's based on animosity or anything. It's just Shimelis and his team feeling so desperate to move the attention from that. And also, Abiy is so desperate, from what I'm hearing from Somali circles, that he's now the one who is begging Hassan Sheikh Mohamud to collaborate him. Remember the last time Hassan wanted to meet with him, it was Abiy who was shunning off. Now it's Abiy who is getting out of his way to bring Hassan Sheikh Mohamud into the. So that is not he loves him. It's just a sign of frustration and desperation from the point of view of Ethiopia. So the war is intensifying, both in Tigray and in Oromia, but it is also leaking to some non-combatant regions. And very soon you will see what happened in 2017, 2016, 2018, where inter-ethnic war intensifies, so that you could see this as a point to exploit.
Thank you, Faisal. The State Department, and I think this is the third statement they are issuing this week in terms of tweet, in terms of formal statements. The first that came was the joint statement from the US, and we saw UK, Germany, Denmark, and Australia joining in. That was from October 12th. And then we saw as well a tweet today from the African Affairs Bureau of the State Department, and they were talking about, let me just share it here. They were mentioning about intensifying the peace process in the coming days. That's the word they use. And then this statement that came today. And Duke, as a person who have been making a number of efforts on peace and humanitarian issues, I just want you to speak to that, how you see all these developments and how the African Union-led process, we learned through government sources today, that even the letter from October 1st that was sent to Debrecen, it was written by the Prime Minister's office people together with the African Union people. So we are hearing verified information that the Obasanjo, Abiy Ahmed, and Musa Faki, they meet regularly in what they call Shuro time at the palace, and that letter was drafted uh, in that meeting through the combined effort from the Prime Minister's people and the African Union. So there are many who are questioning this peace process, maybe as a way of um, just giving time or giving chance to war, not to peace. Duke?
Yeah, the peace process is just it's a shambles right now. Starting going back to last weekend, when the peace negotiations that were going to happen in South Africa, allegedly. This is there were so many mistakes made just in that small step of sending out invitations, getting people to South Africa, that it had fallen apart from the moment that the letter was sent out. It just shouldn't have been a letter being sent out. As you were talking about, there's a lot of close communications between the AU and Obasanjo and the Prime Minister. There is absolutely no communication, it seems, between the AU and the Tigrayan government, the leadership. And the idea that they're sending letters back and forth to communicate, this is how North Korea talks to American presidents. This is not how one of the parties of the conflict should be engaging with the peace process. And the fact that the peace process appears to be a show that's completely being put on in Addis Ababa, where there is no engagement with the Tigrayans. There doesn't appear to be any great engagement with Kenya. And of course, this is going the way that one would expect that to go, because even if it hadn't failed, even if this meeting in South Africa hadn't failed right off the bat, what would have happened? It would have been representatives from the TPLF coming to the meeting, representatives from the Prosperity Party, both of them getting there, and then listening to two people sitting there with tinfoil hats on, waiting for a surrender ceremony to start. That wasn't in the cards. So it's not a serious process right now. For all of the wrangling that happened over the past month, where there seemed to be, some talk about, maybe Obasanjo is the wrong person for the job, which he clearly is the wrong person for the job, but maybe there would be a change, or maybe they would start taking it a little bit more seriously. Maybe the new maybe Mike Hammer would be a new a breath of fresh air, for lack of a better word. All of these things came to nothing. And now we're sitting there. Now they say, oh, in the next couple of days, we'll have some news. But what kind of news would we be excited about? If they said that there's going to be peace talks, well, is everybody invited? Does everybody know there's going to be peace talks? And if everybody's invited, are they actually going to be talking about substantive issues that need to be addressed? And to the point made by by Getch when he sent out the tweet, does this mean that we're going to stop fighting for a second? Does this mean that drones are going to stop flying over Tigray? Does this mean that artillery shelling is going to stop hitting innocent civilians while we talk about this? Is anybody actually serious about peace outside of Tigray? Is anybody serious about peace in the African Union, in Addis Ababa, and in the United States and Europe? I know that they are talking about peace, but do they really want to see it happen? Do they really want to make a good faith effort? And the fact that they've now divorced humanitarian access, or that they've tied humanitarian access to peace, shows me that they're not very serious about this in the first place. Now, the new statement was a little bit of a different, I mean, it was a different tone than the one they put out a few days, I think about 2 days ago, the joint communication where they said, both sides need to stop with the offensive. There, it's very clear. I mean, they get both sides in with the Tigrayan regional government should stop the provocation, but they are they put it out there that the Eritrean and Ethiopian governments, armies need to stop the joint offensive. Why on earth that became something that needed to happen today that didn't need to happen 1 week ago or 49 days ago, I don't know. But if they're trying to find their courage on this, they need to find it a little sooner, and they need to have a backbone and stick to some principles of just being able to identify, there's a joint offensive by a multinational force that has been terrorizing Tigray for 2 years now. That needs to stop. That needs to stop for them to seriously talk about peace. But to try to do peace at the same time that drone strikes are coming down on civilian targets, artillery shells are coming, and tens of thousands, or if not hundreds of thousands of soldiers are pouring in to Tigray, or at least trying to, that's not a legitimate peace process. So I'm waiting for them to get serious about that. I haven't seen an indication of that yet, unfortunately.
Let's talk. Thank you, Dukon, for that. Ezekiel, you mentioned, I guess, on the show how Abiy, when he communicates internally, he's saying, there will not be peace negotiation and thing, and let's mobilize more people for the war. And this is Congressman Brad Sherman, who tweeted yesterday on his how he spoke to the president, and he mentions about the potential genocide in Tigray, and he says the president is well aware of that, the situation, and he is open for ideas. So the question is the US, looking really for ideas and doesn't know what to do? Or are we seeing a situation where maybe what we mentioned earlier, the African-led peace process is something the US and other Western countries are hoping something would come out of that?
I believe they have come to realize that the promise, since the beginning of this war, the promises that Abiy was making, that the war is going to be over in a couple of days, did not materialize. You were talking about the letter from the Africa Union. It was written on October the 1st, and the promise that Abiy gave the international community is that this war is going to end within a week. That is when this was written, when the letter was written, that he was promising that the war would be concluded within a week. That by the October 8 or 9, the TDF will have collapsed, and the leaders would probably be killed, or some who go on the run might be rounded up and be taken at a later time. But the TDF resistance and the TPLF-led government in Tigray would be no more by October 8 and 9 was the promise. And when they met for the Shiro meeting, the three August leaders of Africa, Obasanjo, Faki, and Abiy, this was what they discussed, that by the 8th or the 9th, that Tigray would completely be obliterated, and the Ethiopian and Eritrean defense forces would enter Mekelle triumphantly, and from then on, everything would be under control. Tigray would be governed because they've had it, that the Tigray people have already been tired of the siege and the starvation and the threat of annihilation, that they would just give up. The sullen victims of 2 years of military siege would give up and would cough up uh, uh, anybody that is connected to the TDF and TPLF. And on the 10th of October, when the Ethiopian parliament was going to be opened, that they will declare that Ethiopia had been united or unified. Any threat to Ethiopian sovereignty and territorial integrity had been checked. The country is going to be really on course to become a prosperous country. That was the plan. That was what the letter was about. That letter that was sent to only Debrecen, the president of Tigray, only to one of the parties. It was not sent to Abiy. That would tell you that it was actually written by at his office, and I know who actually wrote it. Now, information that the letter was written basically by the National Security Advisor, a National Security Advisor, and written on the stationery of the AU, and was sent to only to Tigray. And at that time, the new addition as a panelist, the former Kenyan president and the former deputy president of South Africa were not informed. Nothing was clear in that one, because who really was going to give a fig that the war is going to be over by the 8th or the 9th of October? So to simply respond to your question, I think the Americans have come to realize that, at least the Biden administration have come around to believing that whatever Abiy is promising them is not going to materialize, that Tigray is not going to be obliterated. And the war, so brutal, the bloodshed would probably be unbelievable, that it would actually lead to the collapse of authority in Addis Ababa and in Mekelle and in the Horn of Africa. That they looked into the abyss and they decided that the Africa-led peace process, there is no process, to be honest. That's why I went to great lengths to describe what happened in the palace. There is no peace process. The Africa Union-led process is not going to work. For 1 year, it hasn't worked. Obasanjo had been at it. He hasn't produced anything. The only area where progress was made was through the mediation of the envoys, particularly Mike Hammer, who was able to bring the two sides together, even though the Ethiopian side was always unprepared to conclude, because they were not for peace. They were always for war. They promised a military solution, and he had been doing that since last year. Now I think the international community, not the Europeans, but the Americans, have understood that that is not going to happen. So they have decided to take on the mission through the under the aegis of the AU, but with much more international participation to bring or force these two sides to come to the table through some kind of pressure, diplomatic pressure, if not some other pressure that they could use to bring them to the table, because the situation as it is going is untenable. Only on the Western Front, on the Shire Front, reports are that 100,000 people were killed. And as I was saying at the beginning, the Ethiopian economy is teetering on the verge of collapse. Maybe when I said that it was only luxury products, but you can't import soap, canned food, umbrella, table salt, and all kinds of things. That indicates that this is not an economy that could sustain this level of brutal war. Look, Abiy and Isaias have three weapons in their arsenal. One is starvation. Second is brutality. They believe that the first time they went in there, the Ethiopians and the Eritreans, they went to Tigray, they were not brutal enough. So then they're going to double down on their brutality. And third, they will make sure that no Tigrayan would ever be able to call the name of the TPLF or the TDF. Imagine that from what I'm hearing, is about 250 uh, uh, trained, armed personnel are in the TDF. What is Ethiopia going to do with 250,000? Kill all of them? Imprison all of them? What are they going to do about it? The delusion, I think, has run its course, and the rest of the world is beginning to understand it.
Thank you for that. Faisal, in relation to that statement, the Secretary of State as well tweeted the same. Well, I mean, it's, I think, based on the same statement where he talked about the joint offensive by Ethiopia and Eritrea should cease, and the African Union-led peace process. Can you speak to how you see? You have been very critical of the US's view and what it can do and what it will not do, and so on. So, can you speak to that, Faisal?
Yeah, I think I don't expect, and we say that this space several times, all of us. I don't expect Abiy to ever endorse peace process, simply because one is the issue of genocide and crimes against humanity have been documented, and he is presiding over that. Abiy doesn't see the peace process as a savior. So that's why he's always urging his people and quick to win a war that he cannot win. I'm, for one, don't take until I see some action, like Duke was saying. I think what the State Department and the EU and all this they are doing is managing the siege and the starvation strategy that Ethiopia weaponized. Believe me, and I say this at other places, through satellite work and through forensic work, they know much, much more than what we are talking about. They probably can estimate the number of people who have been shelled and died in Shire today. They can. They may not be precise, but they can. So why is the US and the West managing this campaign of death? That's the question I always ask myself. Why? Why is such an indifference exists? I think there are two factors, in my opinion. Number one, the way the world is organized is this whole concept of territorial integrity. Trump is everything in the eyes of the United States. These people are good people. Secretary Anthony Blinken and his team, these are people who know Ethiopia very well. These are people who know TPLF is not a terrorist group, that they have worked with the State Department quite a lot, with their own mistakes, the same as Abiy. I think one fact is that they are conducting diplomacy, and diplomacy can sometimes be cruel. Even if you go into the US history, they joined the Second World War very late, after the Jews were massacred, after pogrom took place, after they knew that people were thrown into the chambers. They were still having wine and cheese with German diplomats. US was the last. So there is always this issue with international diplomacy to second guess what people who are being killed are saying and always give the benefit of the doubt to states. That's one thing. I think the other thing is the US and the Western, if you will, quote unquote, white power, their hands are being tied by the AU. I don't know if I mentioned here, but a conservative Black American writer, Shelby Steele, wrote a tiny book called The Content of Our Character. And he talks about how a white American, good natured liberal hates to be called a racist by a left-leaning African American. I think the AU has imprisoned the good intent and goodwill that could have come from the US. So it's not because the US is silent because they are bad, it's bad. It is because they are afraid the charges that can come from the AU. If you have seen with the Russia, with the that last vote at the UN, where African votes went, and the US kept silent. I'm sure they would have pressured if they needed those votes. By the time the vote went, they probably didn't need, but they are very careful not to anger the AU and the Ethiopian government. But they know that the process, Duke was saying, they know that it's sloppy. Even if you carefully read the letter that the AU supposedly wrote, you could see some of the commas were misplaced. That was the first thing that my eye caught. And I said, who wrote this? That's why I never posted. Because for a while I thought it was a fake thing, because it was not a well-written thing. So, they are babysitting the AU, they are babysitting Abiy, they are babysitting the entire Africa, and they have that conundrum. They haven't reached the US, for whatever reason, it hasn't reached the crescendo of acting on its morality, acting on its humanity. There is only one time in history that the United States won the hearts of the third world on the basis of human rights issue, and that was the Carter time. Every other time, from the 1960s when African independence movement were going on, through the South African issue that we all know, that the US was sitting on the pedestal calling ANC a terrorist. Through that history, I think the US has been on the wrong corner, but there is a time when that pendulum just swings. In my opinion, we are inching towards that pendulum, and our shouts may go, and people like Brad Sherman may hear the shouts. But Anthony Blinken and the State Department, I think, do capture it very well. They are just managing a siege and a massacre until it reaches to a point where they can no longer be silent. Up to this point, they're not even informing. The US government is not even informing. See, the way they get involved in foreign affairs is, first they cultivate the home turf to buy the idea and say and make American population understand the magnitude of the issue. They talk about it, and then after that they act because they have the support. They don't even talk at that level. So we are a long way to go before the US becomes very clear on the moral issue. Up to this point, I totally say that they are managing siege, death, and mayhem, and trying to minimize at the international world scale.
Great. I think we thank you, Faisal, for that. We can go to the last section. What is your final thought? There are people who say the Tigray forces, Tigray leaders, were maybe hoping there would be something out of this, and there is a mention of that Isaias will not stop. And today we learned there is a very intensive war on the Europe side, on the eastern side. So it looks like, changing the direction and the point of attack. There is a very intensive war going on, as the press release from the State Department also mentioned. So what's your final thought in terms of the coming days? Again, it's a very difficult territory in terms of predicting or making any forecast, but still, final thoughts for the day.
I don't know if the Abiy could be pressured into doing anything, because he doesn't control his own military this time. He is in Arak Kilo, but he doesn't control the military itself, because the major activities right now are not from the Ethiopian side, they're from the Eritrean side. Keep in mind that a whole command, the Eastern Command, was sent to Eritrea at the beginning of the war. The whole command, the entire command, How many divisions it has, I don't know. The Ethiopian Airlines was transporting soldiers to Massawa, from Massawa to Asmara, and then those that were transported by air to Eritrea were attacking on the three fronts, Adigrat, Sorana, Zalambasa. But the main idea, the main strategy this time was to concentrate on Shire, because they believe, I don't know why they believe this. I'm not a military man, but if you had tried a war plan and it hadn't worked, if it failed, you don't repeat it, because the enemy will be ready for it. But the Eritreans and the Ethiopians believe, particularly the Eritreans believe, that if they take over Shire, there will be a domino effect, that Axum will fall, Adwa, and then Mekelle would be taken over. They say that because the first time they attacked from that side, this is what happened, that once Shire had fallen, the others simply were just fell in line, and then were taken over by the Ethiopian military. They also recall what happened when the TPLF was fighting against the Derg government, that the 17-year war with the TPLF at the time was decided in Shire. Shire was the decisive battle. From then on, the TPLF was simply riding their victory there to Addis Ababa, all the way to Addis Ababa. So now the Eritreans now believe that they could do that from that side. And Abiy this time, as if what he did in the first round of November 2020 was not a travesty about protecting Ethiopia's sovereignty and territorial integrity, now he has sent Ethiopian forces to Eritrea and put them under the command of Eritrean generals. They're not going to come back. Isaias is not going to let them go back. Ask Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, who wanted to take the Somali trainees in Sawa, and Isaias wouldn't let him. Isaias is not going to let the Ethiopians go back. So whatever the outside the diplomats do, the key is in the hands of Isaias Afwerki, and he's not going to relent. He's not going to let go of this opportunity to annihilate the TPLF. He cannot sleep a night without annihilating the TPLF. That is his nightmare. He's not going to give up. So even if, let's say, Abiy relents to pressure from the international community, and there are the signs of robust engagement, even the Wall Street Journal is writing that the Eritrean and Ethiopian willful targeting of infrastructure and the people is unacceptable. So if all kinds of diplomatic pressure make Abiy relent, he does not control the war. Isaias would not sleep. He would not give up. Even if the international community engages and even takes it over from the AU, the impartial AU, the incompetent AU, the co-conspirator AU with the Ethiopian government, I don't think this war is going to end as long as Isaias is there. So what is the international community going to do about Isaias? Well, are they going to launch a military offensive, military action to neutralize him, to stop him? I'm not sure. So short of that, I'm not sure that any peace process, even a robust one, a fair one, could result in the cessation of hostilities, because Isaias wouldn't let this opportunity go, and Abiy is unable to make a decision on this issue.
Thank you. Faisal, final thoughts of the day?
I think I will give first two quick. You skipped him last time. Am I right? I can go. I can go. Yeah, just be short. I think Abiy is on the one hand, Isaias is a factor for not letting him engage in a serious peace negotiation. I think the other factor is Abiy doesn't know his fate after peace. What would happen to him and his generals and all the criminal issues? He doesn't know that. I think I saw the tweet by the Caledonian congressman asking for ideas. I think there are several options that this issue, and we can talk about that some other time. But I think there has to be, as Uhuru said in his response when he declined the unconsulted, haphazard invitation. I think there has to be a cessation of hostility and an unconditional, passage of aid, particularly essential aid, food, medicine, what have you, and the other services. I don't think TPLF and TDF from this on should accept any deal that doesn't include that, and any deal. I think it was Duke or Iskel who was saying any peace process that it has not been consulted. They already lost hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands, through either the war or through starvation. There is no point lower that TDF, TPLF, and the Tigrayan people can go. So the sacrifices of those people must be honored by at least demanding something. They shouldn't just jump in when there is a call from somewhere. And I think that cheapness there for gaining power. You remember here a long time ago, we said about a year and a half ago, if not around that time, that Addis Ababa is not serious about lifting the siege and giving people to be fed. We said that. We said it's weaponizing the siege and the food, and still after so many months, things are getting worse, as Duke was telling us. So I think there is laxness, and I can understand everything, but I think there is a tightening up of the TPLF side and an honoring of the people it lost, and there is no point lower than what they can reach, and there is nothing else. As the scale was saying, there is nothing else Abiy can do. They distributed millions of T-shirts saying we're going to celebrate in Magale during the New Year, thinking that the war was finished. And that's why so I think there are things that can be done by the US, number one, to pressure Eritrea and get out. Number two, possibly, in order to save the people of Tigray, see a way to help people defend themselves. That's as an American, as an apple pie. Help people defend themselves. The drone copyright materials, the jets and air power that are killing Shiraz people today are produced none other than American companies. There have been several efforts by American activists to go after gun manufacturing, but they couldn't do because of the First Amendment. Is really Anthony Blake and his team comfortable that their drones, which went through Turkey, are comfortable and go sleep with their families when the same drones America passed its technology are killing innocent people, civilians who are farming their land, who are going about? I don't know. I think this is a test of the American political system when an African community is being suffering and being obliterated and being killed by a dictator, that they will sit tight until it reaches the Rwanda syndrome. Maybe that's when they will wake up. Up to this point, I see indifference of the factories that Eskiel mentioned. I will add the indifference of the West to the African lives. We're not even saying help TPLF. We're not saying help TDF. We're not even saying help Tigray people. We're saying let people live. Your weapons are killing, to be honest with you, in a different way. And if America just sits on this, it would be in its own historical repository, and other generation could deal with this.
Okay, thank you, Faisal. Duke, the final thought, the final word is yours today.
Well, thank you, and I'll be brief. What is happening right now is the same thing that's been happening for the past 2 years. It's taken a different. It looks a little different, but it's the same. The Ethiopian government, the Eritrean government together can't beat the Tigrayan fighters. They can beat the international community, the diplomacy from the international community. They haven't put up much of a fight. There needs to be, we need to change the dynamic. I think the US can do that. I think that we should be putting more options on the table as far, and quite frankly, as far as the no-fly zone goes. There's been a lot of drone attacks, a lot of air attacks against civilians. Well, those missiles could be directed somewhere else. I think that we couldn't do a no-fly zone in Darfur allegedly because it was too big, just as far as the geography. Tigray would be a little bit of a different story. It's a little bit more feasible to do a no-fly zone if they wanted to, if they were willing to take that measure. Whatever happens, though, it has to be accelerated. It's tragic to see the failure of the international community to do anything to help the situation. But what's even more tragic is to see this failure in slow motion that is going to be a failure from the second step, but they still want to take 10 steps down the line to show, just that they gave it a good shot and it failed anyway. These things need to happen quicker. If this new statement is a reflection of a new direction from the United States, then that's wonderful. Then that's something that's long overdue, but needs to happen. But it has to happen quick, because every single day, every single hour, people are dying. Innocent civilians are dying. None of these people are expendable. None of the families are expendable. So they need to do something. They need to do it now. All of the delays are paid for with the blood of innocent civilians. And that is something that you can't say it's unacceptable and then accept it. It has to be unacceptable. We have to make it unacceptable from the United States perspective. I know that I understand that there are limits to our power. There are limits to what we could do, but we're making almost no difference right now as far as good. We could be doing better than what we're doing right now. And it needs to happen faster. If we're going to make 10 more mistakes, they need to happen soon so we can get to a better strategy, because people can't wait any longer.
Thank you very much.
If I could 2 points to what they said in terms of really a solution, seeking solution. The US is insisting on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ethiopia. This is theory right now. It's just theory. The territorial integrity of Ethiopia has been violated from the north, from the west, from the east, from everywhere. It's been violated. To keep the country together after genocide everywhere, it's going to be very difficult to keep it together. There should be another formula for that. So insisting on the theory of Westphalia, or the idea of sovereignty, while people are dying in hundreds of thousands, it doesn't make any sense. Number two, the Ethiopian government is not really a real advocate for the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ethiopia. The Ethiopia's sovereignty was violated by Abiy. He allowed it, and he cannot do anything about it. Let's get Ethiopians together so that they can defend their country. And under the present circumstances, even what you want, that's to Americans, even the territorial integrity and the sovereignty and the unity of Ethiopia that you are suing for cannot be obtained. It just can't. So what needs to be done is do something about Eritrea. You don't have to bomb them, but you can threaten to bomb them. Something that convinces Isaias to back down needs to be done. Otherwise, there would be a waste of time talking about peace.
Okay, thank you so much. So Duke Burbridge, Faisal Robla, and Skel Gabisa, thank you for your time and for your insightful contribution as usual. Hope to see you next week. Good night from here. You have been following us live on the weekly H panel, and we'll be back next week. Before I sign off, I just want to again announce that Duke would be starting a new show on Sunday, that is 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and the name of the show is Tigray Humanitarian Update. It's self-explanatory. This is the intro. Okay, so Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, you will see the new show by Duke Burbridge. That would be Tigray Humanitarian Update. Good night from here. Your host was Gita Josefa. Thank you for watching. Bye.